So our nervous system itself, which is, our brain, our spinal cord, our nerves. Our nervous system is made of special type of tissue, nerve tissue, that's made up of special types of cells. And those cells are called neurons. One single individual nerve cell is called a neuron. And it has sort of a distinctive shape. And its shape and its parts allow it to actually do its job. So this is a neuron. Okay? And a neuron, its job is to communicate, to send information from one part of the body to another through what we call nerve impulses. So when I was touching Bailey's hand with that tool, the pressure sensors in her skin were sending nerve impulses up the nerves and the neurons in her finger, up her arm, into her spinal cord, up into her brain, which then processed that information to tell her what she felt. Okay? So those nerve impulses, okay, they work via electrical signal and a chemical signal. And so when I touched that tool to her finger, that was a stimulus that the brain was interpreting. And then when Bailey told me how many she felt, that was the response. So we're going to talk about the parts of a neuron. Okay? This is one single cell. It may look a lot different from sort of the usual animal cells that we studied back at the beginning of the year, but this is a cell. It's just a specialized type of cell called a neuron. Okay? And its job is to receive a signal, a nerve impulse, and then send that nerve impulse along. So we're going to label the parts here, and then we'll talk about what they do. So a neuron has all these sort of branches. Okay?
You have branches in us?
And they're attached to this main part called the cell body. So this is sort of what you might call the main part of the cell. It has the nucleus, it has other organelles in it, it has cytoplasm in it. But then attached to the cell body are all these branches. You could, they're like branches on a tree. There's many of these, and they're called dendrites. Dendrites.
Sounds like a dishwasher.
And then the part that leads away from the cell body, this elongated section, it's called an axon. And that, A-X-O-N. And then at the end of that axon, there are some small little sort of bulbs that are called the terminals. So the cell body, the dendrites, the axon, and the terminals. So we're going to talk about what these parts do, what their function is. So the cell body itself, it's sort of the main headquarters of the cell. Okay, it has the nucleus, other cell organelles. You can move up here. These dendrites, all these little branches that are surrounding the cell body, you could think of them as kind of listening for a signal. They're waiting for a nerve impulse to come in from another neuron. So those dendrites are listening for that signal. They pick up a message from another neuron. And it turns that into an electrical signal. Our neurons work via electricity. We actually have an electrical signal that travels from one part of the neuron to another. This is one of the reasons that getting electrocuted, getting shocked, is dangerous. It interferes with the functioning of your nervous system, because your nervous system works on small electrical signals. Being shocked by something can overwhelm that system. Did I tell you about when I got almost electrocuted in my house?
No.
I was working on converting my garage into a living room. I was putting an outlet in. I thought I shut power off to it. And one of my good friends was there helping me, Mr. Arcuri. And while I was there putting the outlet in,
Wait,
it actually was live before I knew it. It had electricity going through it. So I was putting the new electrical outlet in, and I touched the wire inside of there, and I started getting electrocuted. And I was like, and so guess what Mr. Arcuri did?
He saved
Did he
your
try to
life.
save my life?
No.
No, he started to laugh hysterically.
Mr. Arcuri!
So, you know, I didn't die or anything, so that's good. You know, but I did get I got a pretty good shock from it, and he thought that was entertaining. But getting electrocuted can be serious and can cause somebody to die if it's high voltage, if it has high amperage or whatever. But lots of times, you know, you could get shocked and it's just a brief shock and you take your hands away. You know, one of the things they say if you're working with electricity, like when I was putting in that electrical socket, that you should only work with one hand in the box because, yeah, you may get a shock, but if you're working with two hands in the box, if you touch the live wire with one hand and with the other hand it's grounded on something metal, that electrical current can go up one arm, across your chest, through your heart, and out the other hand, and that can cause your heart to stop. And so you're supposed to, working in an electrical box, try to only work with one hand.
Did your hair go all crazy like?
No,
Does that happen?
I don't have that much hair to go crazy.
I know that. Wait, when?
It's not like this, it's just like this.
When was this?
I was like 5 years ago or something.
Oh, so
All right.
you have a lot of hair then?
So this electrical signal comes into these dendrites, and then it gets turned, it starts as a chemical signal, gets turned into electrical signal, starts to travel through the dendrites into the cell body, and then it gets transmitted down the axon of the cell. The axon is carrying this message from here to here. It's moving it from one location to another. So this electrical signal moves down to the end of the neuron, to the terminal. The terminal is this very end. And so if this impulse, this nerve impulse, is going to be passed from this cell to another cell, now you can see this is the beginning of another neuron over here. You don't see the whole thing, but it's here. What part of that neuron is this?
The neurons? What part of the neuron?
Those are the dendrites of another cell, which would take the message further. And then it would end at the terminal, and there'd be another one to take it further. So it's sort of passing this nerve impulse along from one neuron to another. But they're not actually connected to each other. These neurons, there's a gap between these terminals and these dendrites. That gap is called the synapse. So how does that message get passed? If they're not connected, this electrical signal can't jump across that gap. So actually what happens is there are special chemicals in the terminal called neurotransmitters. And once this electrical signal gets to the terminal, those terminals release neurotransmitters, and then they connect here to these dendrites to move that nerve impulse to the next cell. Then it changes to an electrical signal and passes on. So it's constantly changing from electrical to a chemical signal as it's passed from one neuron to another. This is just one other fact. Let me mention this because it's not in your notes. You see along this axon, they're in blue here. These are special cells that produce a substance called the myelin. Have you ever heard of myelin or myelination? So this is like insulation. It allows this message to be transmitted down the axon more efficiently. And actually this insulation, this myelin, builds up. The more this neuron is used, the more nerve impulses that pass through it, the thicker this myelin gets, and the better that signal is passed on. And actually, scientists have discovered that this is one of the reasons that we learn things, that we get better, that we improve on things as we practice more. Because, for example, if you are, probably many of you play an instrument. How many people play an instrument? How many people play a sport? How many people dance or do ice skating or gymnastics? How many people play video games? Okay? All right. All of these things work on some of the same principles. You know, if you're learning your instrument, for example, the very first time you learn, let's say, a new piece of music or new scale, let's say, when you were younger, do you play it very quickly?
No.
Do you make many mistakes?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have to think about how you place your fingers and how you make the notes? Yeah, same thing in sports. If you're learning how to juggle a soccer ball, at first you maybe get 1 or 2 times and it's hard and you really have to think about it. Okay? When you're playing a new video game, until you learn the controls and you practice, you're not very good at it for a while. Okay? When you're learning a new dance routine, it takes you thinking about it and really focusing on what you're going to do next. But as you practice all of those things, as you keep using those same neurons, because every time you think about how you're playing that note, your brain is sending the message to the muscles in your fingers, okay? And it's using those same neurons time after time after time. And as it does that, this myelin builds up. It gets thicker. That message from your brain gets to those muscles faster, and it starts to become more automatic. If you're learning a new language, if you're studying index cards for learning the parts of the skeletal system, the more you practice, the more you use those neurons, the bigger that myelin sheath becomes, and the faster you get at it, the more ingrained it becomes. And so eventually, you learn your piece of music or your scale. You've learned that video, how to play that game. You learned your new dance routine. You learned all the vocab words from your French lesson. And it becomes much easier. You don't have to think about it. You can play that scale just sort of playing it. You don't think about it. You don't have to concentrate as much. You just do it. We sometimes call that muscle memory. And part of the reason we can develop that muscle memory is because the more we use these pathways, the more this myelin builds up and the better the signals travel. And so it's why we can improve on things as we practice. It's why we can learn things as we study, because of the way our nervous system works. Sophia?
2 things. One, I still can't juggle a soccer ball to this day. And
How much have you practiced
well, no, like
recently?
No, listen to this.
Okay.
You know how like you and Miss Taylor here always taught me how to
Yes.
play shows on your team?
Yes.
Well, I still wasn't able to do it.
Okay, so things like that take practice. Just like if you start playing the clarinet for
Hey, I played that.
2 months and then you don't pick it up for 2 more years, you're not going to get better at it. And even if you were once good at some certain skill, often if you stop using those pathways, that insulation starts to break down. Those connections between nerves start to be used for other things. Because you only have so many neurons in your brain, and your brain will use them for whatever is important to you at that time. So if you have some skill, something you did, and then you don't use it, well, your brain can use those pathways for other purposes. And your brain is constantly rearranging those neurons and how they're connected so that you are using them for the things that they are most necessary for. So again, this just shows sort of that movement of the nerve impulse. It comes in through the dendrites, goes into the cell body. This electrical signal travels all the way down the axon till it gets to the end, and then it can have some effect. It can connect to a muscle and tell the muscle to move. Okay? It can connect into our brain or into our spinal cord to pass that message along. Now there are some pathways. So sometimes we need to send this information all the way up to our brain. Okay? so that it can be processed. And so this information comes in through what we call sensory neurons. These are neurons that lead into our spinal cord and brain. For example, the nerves in your ear pass the sound you're hearing right now into your brain. Your brain integrates and processes those signals, and then it can send out any necessary responses. It can then send a response to the muscles in your arm to write your notes. It does that through something we call motor neurons, okay? And that tells your muscles how to move, okay? So, does this video work? I don't know if it does. So, some of you are probably going to be going out for track in the spring. Some of you maybe swim in the winter or in the fall. And I'm sure you all have run a race against somebody just for fun before. And so, yes, it does work. When you go to your first track meet, let's say, in the spring, and you line up for your first race, you'll line up against the people you're running against. They will make a sound, sometimes use like a starting gun, and then you start running. Now, it takes time for you to hear the sound of the starting gun, for that information to come into your brain, for your brain to decide you need to start running, and then send that message to the muscles in your legs. It takes an amount of time for that to happen. It's called your reaction time. Tomorrow's lab, we're going to be measuring our reaction time. And in some people, it's better than in other people's, and it can improve with practice. Okay? In official, like world track and field events, in the Olympics, for example, it's all monitored electronically. There's a sound to start running, and you'll see people start running immediately. But if the gun goes off and then you start to run, but if it's less than 0.1 seconds, it's considered a false start and you're disqualified. Even though you left after the starting sound, but if it's less than 0.1, you're still disqualified. Why do you think that is? Why would they disqualify? You're starting after the sound, so why should you be disqualified, Lily?
Because you didn't start at the same time as other people.
Well, the rule isn't that you have to start at the same time.
Oh, wait.
As soon as you hear the sound, you can start running.
It's kind of like cheating, maybe?
In a way, but you start after a sound, but the reason it's considered a false start is nobody can respond that quickly. Less than 0.1 seconds. It's physically impossible. So, if you do start running, and you start after the gun but before 0.1, what were you really doing, Brendan? Yeah, you just happen to like anticipate it, and you happen to get lucky and start running just as they were going to sound the gun, and so you got a false start versus the other people. So that's why they have that rule in track and field, that you have to, that if you start too soon after the gun, it's a false start. And it's very small amount of time, it's only 0.1 seconds, but it
can make a difference.
Make a difference. This is Asafa Powell. He's one of the fastest people on Earth.
Not
And
using what was the
the
fastest.
video was just of him
Historian.
starting. He's Jamaican.
That's
Um,
probably Jamaican.
We also have special types of responses that are called reflexes. When you go to the doctor for your annual checkup and they tap on your knee with the little metal mallet, your quadricep contracts and your leg sort of kicks forward. That's an inbuilt reflex. Now you don't think about that. You're not having to think, oh, the doctor hit my knee, I better move my thing. It's automatic. If you touch something that's very hot, you immediately grab your hand away very, very quickly. If you had to actually get that information about getting burned to your brain and then back out to your muscles, it would take time and you would damage your skin even further. So we have these reflexes. That message never goes to your brain. There's this loop. The information from your finger saying, oh, this is super hot, goes up your arm to your spinal cord, and it goes right back out to the muscles in your arm, and you just immediately almost yank your hand away. It's a protective reflex so that we don't damage ourselves. So if you ever burn yourself like that, you know, it doesn't hurt at first, right? You burn yourself, and then it takes like a second for you to start to feel that, oh yeah, that hurt, I did burn myself. And luckily, you take your hand away sooner. When I was talking to you yesterday about those people that are born without pain receptors or other heat receptors in their skin can do serious damage to themselves because they don't have that reflex that pulls their hand away very quickly. Last thing to write, we're not done, so keep your notes out. Concussion. We will talk more about concussions this week, but how many people have had a concussion before?
Many.
Okay, many people. A concussion is when a violent blow to the head, hitting your head, getting hit by something, causes the brain to sometimes hit against the inside of your cranium and actually hurt your brain and cause it to be injured. And concussions happen often in sports. We think about concussions. And concussions are most dangerous when? So if you had a concussion, what did you have to do in your sport?
Not less. Sit out.
Sit out. Because if you get 2 concussions in a short amount of time, you can do serious damage to your brain that can, in some cases, be permanent. And we'll talk more tomorrow about some cases of second impact syndrome, which is what that is called.